Hi, everyone, and welcome to the webinar titled Thriving Under Pressure, a Guide to Building Resilience. I'm excited to be able to share a few thoughts with you around this idea of resilience. My name is Joan Peterson. I both facilitate and design workshops for Bluepoint Leadership Development. When we look at this idea of resilience, I have a true or false statement for you. What do you think about this? One is born with resilience. Do you think we're born naturally with resilience? And you look around, and my guess is you see some people who just seem to be able to bounce, who just seem to be able to pick up when something happens to them. But the research tells us, not surprisingly, or we wouldn't be having a webinar on it, that resilience is not a genetic or instinctive reaction. It's actually a learned response, and it's a learned response to adversity and challenge. So in order for us to be more resilient, it does require intention, it requires practice, it requires us to be in situations where we're challenged and facing adversity, and of course, increased capacity for resilience. I don't think we need research to tell us this, is enabling, rewarding, creative, liberating. So if we look at the fact that it is learned, and of course, we'll spend time today looking at, well, what are some of the things that I can do to be more intentional about learning the response for myself and potentially for others. The Resilience Institute, where this quote came from, they of course do research on resilience. And what I was fascinated by was some of the research they did on the impact of COVID and resilience. Not surprisingly, COVID had a significant impact on our resilience. According to their data, small sample size, but global data, first quarter 2020 were some of the lowest numbers that they had seen to date. And what's interesting is the 6 quarters following that, some of the highest numbers they've seen to date. So that adversity and challenge, and then are we intentional about how we bounce when we face that adversity and challenge? So if you think about like, okay, well, what does that mean? What does resilience look like? If you look at the dictionary definition, it's the capacity to recover quickly. You know, sometimes you hear it called the grit or toughness. Sometimes people say it's bouncing back, and I don't think it's bouncing back. I don't think we ever bounce back. I think we do bounce forward. The Resilience Institute said it's a learned ability to bounce, I believe, forward, grow, connect, and then rediscover that flow of getting us back into what we do best and us being at our best. I love this slide, not because of the quote, and I think the quote is a great one. I love this slide because of the piece of pottery. And if any of you are familiar with Japanese art form called kintsugi, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's the art of when pottery breaks, it's putting it back together with gold to make it stronger and more beautiful. And if you think about resilience from that perspective, something happens as humans, we're all flawed. We face adversity, we face challenge, something happens, we crack a bit. Can we use everything we have within us to bounce forward, to fill that with gold? I think what we share in as humans is we share imperfections, but can we make those imperfections as beautiful as possible and learn as we move and make it stronger, as this, you know, the picture of this bowl suggests? So when I think of resilience, like I think of that bowl. Are we able to recognize that, yep, I can put this back together in a way that I'm stronger moving forward? So when we look at resilience for the time that we'll be together on this webinar, we'll look at it through 4 lenses. The first lens is really our mindset. You know, how do we look at things? Is our ability for us to be more intentional about how we look at things from a resilience perspective. The second piece is around accepting reality. When we look at what's facing us, when we look at the challenges and the adversity, are we able to accept them and then react based on what reality looks like? The third piece is around searching for meaning. Am I able to really, from an inner core perspective, recognize what is meaning and purpose for me and use that as a mechanism to bounce? And the fourth piece is being able to innovate out. It's this, to look at whatever situation I'm in in a way that I can go around, through, over, under? How can I innovate out, depending on the situation about which I'm a part of? So as we go through, I'll look at each of these, and my hope is you'll think about, well, how does this relate to me? What can I take from this and apply immediately? And how might I use this to help those around me? If you're a leader, to help those on your team. If you're a parent, to look around and maybe there's children in your lives you might be able to help with. Maybe it's a colleague or a coworker. So the first piece around leader's mind, there are three behaviors, if you will, associated with a leader's mind, and they're on the screen here. So as you look at them, I'll invite you to think about, how would I rate myself on each of these behaviors? The first is about learning from experiences, learning from what happens, kind of taking a look back, a bit of a postmortem on my experiences, learning through the experiences of others. The second is about embracing challenges. So looking at challenges as opportunities to grow. And then the third is around locus of control, knowing what I can control and what I can't. So believing that, you know what, not blaming and believing that I can control a large aspect of the life that I'm living today. We'll look specifically at the first and the second one, but we'll look at it through the lens of a lot of the work that Carol Dweck does. So if this is something that you want to spend close attention to, my suggestion is to look at, again, some of the work Carol Dweck does, to look at some of the work done on locus of control. Carol Dweck, for those of you who aren't familiar with her, does work on growth and fixed mindset. And she says this: the best thing parents can do is to teach their children to love challenges, be intrigued by mistakes, enjoy effort, and keep on learning. What I think is interesting is, like, she has done a ton of work with children and parents. I believe, and a lot of organizations have adapted some of what she's done with children inside organizations. Like, this isn't just for parents and children. As leaders and as humans, can we teach ourselves and others to love challenges, be intrigued by mistakes, enjoy effort, and keep on learning? That's a growth mindset. And if we define the two, fixed mindset is our tendency to believe that our talents, intelligence, habits can never be changed. So, okay, I'm good at math, I'm not good at math. Yeah, I'm good at a P&L, but I'm not good at, calling people. Like, I'm good at this, I'm not good at that. That's a fixed mindset. A growth mindset is the tendency to believe that we can develop our intelligence and our abilities. That is, we can grow. Our belief is that most of us have a fixed mindset around certain things and around certain people. So around certain people, right? So I'm going to ask you to just take a moment and think about, what you do every day, inside and outside work, about what, and maybe with whom, do you have a fixed mindset? Oh, I'll never be able to do that. Or he or she will never be able to do that. And might there be an opportunity to expand your thinking for yourself and others around whatever it is that you thought of? I also believe that every single one of us has a growth mindset around certain things and certain people. How can you expand that to include more? How can you think differently about challenges? How can you challenge yourself out of, I'll never be good at this, or I can't do that? I have a daughter she's now 16. She is a soccer player, and her coach does a lot of work with the girls on the team around growth mindset. And one of the things that she constantly challenges them with is the power of yet. And so I'll see her out in the backyard trying to do a new trick or a new skill, and she gets frustrated. And the first thing that she, and I think many of us, want to say is, oh, I can't do it. I'll never be able to do it. And she knows that, of course, I know that coach is working on this power of yet. And she'll say, I'll never get that. And then she'll look at me and she'll say, yet. Can we add that power of yet when we start to tell ourselves we cannot do something? I'm not good at that yet. What do I need to do in order to have a more growth mindset around whatever that specific skill is? Challenging me around how I think about other people as well. these of course come from Carol Dweck as well. You can come up with your own. Can you, at the end of the day, ask yourself some questions like, what did I learn today? What mistake did I make today that taught me something? You know, what did I really try really hard at today? And I think sometimes we again, as a parent, you know, I will ask my children, like, well, what did you try hard at today? Like, what are you excited that you learned today? But I don't ask myself those. Can we really challenge ourselves to learn something every day? Builds resilience. So that idea of a growth mindset builds resilience. The second piece that I'd like to explore is this idea of accepting reality. And if you look at the behaviors associated with accepting reality, they're on the screen here. I show myself compassion. I'm able to forgive myself. I recognize feelings of despair, anger, discouragement. They don't last long. I take responsibility for the outcomes of my decisions and actions. So the second one really is around emotional intelligence. Am I able to understand my emotions and recognize those and how they're impacting me? The third one's around accountability. Am I able to take responsibility for the situation in which I find myself? Bit of locus of control in the leader's mind and in an accept reality. The first one, though, is the one I'd like to talk about. This idea of self-compassion. What's interesting, this is anecdotally, we've probably worked with thousands of leaders since COVID around resilience. And we asked them to do a bit of a self-assessment using the behaviors that you see here and that you'll see on future slides. And again, anecdotally, what I found is the lowest rated behavior is that one around showing myself compassion. This ability to be able to forgive myself. And Kristen Neff, if this is something you want to explore further, Kristen Neff is probably the most renowned expert on self-compassion. And what she says is self-compassion is a practice of goodwill, not good feelings. With self-compassion, we mindfully accept that, yep, this is painful. And we embrace ourselves with kindness and care in response, remembering that imperfection is part of the shared human experience. So this is not about letting ourselves off the hook. It is about showing ourselves compassion. And what she says is there's a difference between self-compassion and self-esteem. With self-compassion, it's about me. It's about showing myself kindness. With self-esteem is me judging myself in relationship to others. This is not about, well, how do I stack up with the person sitting next to me? This is about me looking at myself and recognizing that I'm not letting myself off the hook. I am recognizing that I make mistakes, that I can give myself a break, that I take responsibility for what went wrong, and then I can move on from there. It's that moving on from there that is so lacking in many of us. We continue to punish ourselves for mistakes we've made. When I come to this slide, it's a bit haunting to me, and I'm going to ask you to think about this. If I asked you to name all the things that you love, I'm going to ask you to start to think about what comes to mind, who comes to mind, all the things that you love. And then the next part of that ask is this: how long would it take for you to name yourself? You know, do we show ourselves enough care, especially during times of adversity and challenge? Do we look to take care of ourselves? Studies have shown that individuals who are able to show themselves compassion after something painful happens, of course, they boost their mental resilience. They're able to bounce more quickly. So if I can find ways to show myself compassion, I'm able to get myself out of that. I'm able to bounce more quickly than those who don't. Sometimes it's as simple as changing the language we use. And if you look at, you know, an act of failing versus being a failure, sometimes if something happens, do we say, you know, I made a mistake, I failed, I feel disappointed. What am I going to learn from that? I'm okay, let's move on. Or do we say, oh my gosh, I failed. I'm a failure. It's never going to go okay. So it's thinking about the language we use. And if we hear others using language like I failed, therefore I'm a failure, can we help them change that language? So it's challenging ourselves to think about not how am I going to punish myself? What can I learn from this? so that I can move and move forward. And I think a lot of this is challenging our inner self-talk. If you're anything like me, I mean, sometimes I say the cruelest things to myself. Can you challenge yourself when you hear that, like that inner awful talk to yourself? Can you challenge yourself to say, how would you treat a friend in that same situation? Is there an opportunity for you to change that critical self-talk, not letting yourself off the hook? But can you change that critical self-talk? How would you treat a friend in that same situation? So I'll ask you to just think for a moment. What are examples of how you have in the past or can show your self-compassion? Like what works for you? Make a list of the things that you need to be more intentional about doing. That something happens, I make a mistake. What am I going to do to show myself compassion? Again, not letting myself off the hook, but learning from the experience so that I can move on. And what do you need to do to hold yourself accountable to that? What does that look like for you? That's a way for us to start to build and continue to build our resilience. Martin Seligman has done a lot of work on how we deal with adversity. Many of you might know of his 3 Ps, again, I believe, tied closely to resilience. And the 3 Ps, the first is when something happens, when you face an adverse situation, to say, okay, it's not personal. Like this isn't happening 100% because of me. Like just because something bad isn't happening, if something bad is happening to me, it's not all my fault. Like COVID was awful. I didn't cause it, right? I own my response to it, but it's not personal. The second P is it's not pervasive. That is just because something went wrong, I faced an obstacle, I first faced adversity in some part of my life. It doesn't pervade, it's not pervasive across my entire life. So, I'm making my kids breakfast, I burn the toast, awful. Like I'm not a bad parent, maybe I am. I'm not a bad parent because I burnt the toast, right? Like lots of other parts of parenting rather than can I put an appropriate breakfast on the table for my children. So it's thinking about it's not pervasive. I make a mistake at work. It doesn't mean that I'm awful at what I do. So it's finding a way to challenge myself around, it's not pervasive. It's this one situation. How do I move past that? And the last piece is it's not permanent. This too shall pass. Like the pain, the hardship that I'm feeling now will not feel the same every day. It's not permanent. There are some things that are permanent. And the way I feel about it today is not permanent. I bounce when I start to think about, okay, what does this look like moving forward? I believe as humans, as leaders, parents, it's changing this conversation. So this is an awful screen. So if you think about the 3 Ps on a screen, this is it. The first P, it's my fault. This is awful. Like that's personal. That's making whatever it is all about me. The second is pervasive. Well, because this is awful, my whole life is awful. And the third is it's permanent and it's always going to be awful. My hope is that you and those around you wouldn't say these 3 things or 3 things like this in the same paragraph. But I think we sometimes have a habit of maybe falling into one of these. Do you know which one it is for you? Which one might you need to kind of check yourself on? And is there a way to change the conversation? Either the conversation you have with yourself or helping those around you. For those of you who are leaders, helping those around you to change the conversation. So for example, if someone says it's all my fault, I'm not sure that this is all your fault. Just because it happened to you doesn't mean it happened because of you. And then it's getting them into the conversation. What part of this do you own or not own? What part of this isn't your fault? So it's being real coach-like and helping people see that P, that personal piece, and it's not all your fault. Yes, I own part of it. And what's the part that I don't own? Changing the conversation around pervasive, gosh, just this happened, everything's awful. Well, what made you happy today? Like what parts of work are going really well for you? What are you really good at? What brings you joy? What are your strengths? So it's helping those around you or ourselves recognize that whatever it is that's happening, not pervasive. And the last piece around permanent, it's looking forward. It's asking people, okay, looking forward, what do you want to accomplish? Can you set small milestones? How will you celebrate your success? Okay, what will this look like next week, next month, next year? So it's helping to not just change the conversation, but change how our mind thinks about the situation in which we find ourselves. The third part of the model I'd like to just share a few thoughts on is this idea of search for meaning. This is about knowing what brings me joy. It's around knowing where I find purpose and meaning and being able to find space for that. And it's around having a strong social support system. So as you look at those three things, again, for yourself, is there anything that you might want to personally dive into more deeply? Like, do you really know what brings you joy? What makes you happy? What gets you out of bed in the morning? What is it that, where do you find purpose and meaning? And who around you is that support system inside and outside work? Many of you may have read Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. Fantastic read. It's around obviously searching for meaning. For those of you who don't know the name Viktor Frankl, Holocaust survivor, and he wrote about his experience, about his search for meaning really kept him alive in the worst, the worst of situations. And he said this, those who have a why to live can bear with almost any how. So once I know what my why is, and of course, Simon Sinek has done a ton of work around, starting with why. Do I know what that why is? And when I'm in a situation where I'm facing adversity, challenge, can I draw on that in some way? So I'm going to ask you to think about, well, what is purpose and meaning for you? Like, what do you value most? What are your core ideals? What's at the heart of what you do and who you are? This is around purpose. This isn't, I think joy is different. And I would suggest that you think about what brings you joy as well. What are your passions? This and what you see on the screen here, and of course, it's not an exhaustive list. This is, what is it that you find meaningful? Is it excellence? Is it relationships? Maybe it's a higher calling. Is it equality? Is it achievement? So my suggestion is to spend a moment, as you're reading them here, come back to it and choose 5. If you had to prioritize these, maybe the one that is your core ideal isn't on the screen here. What are your core ideals? Where do you find purpose and meaning? And in times, again, adversity and challenge, how can you tap into that? I think as leaders, we have a responsibility beyond recognizing what our core ideals are, and that is recognizing the core ideals of those whom we lead. If I asked you to think about those on your team, and if you want to look outside of work, those in your immediate family, which ones of these would they choose? Quite often, if we don't think about core ideals through the lens of the other person, we just assume that they're the same. Huge missed opportunity inside organizations if I treat you through the lens of my values as opposed to through the lens of yours. Again, if we're looking to build resilience inside our teams, inside our families, is there an opportunity for you to seek out, to listen for, to ask, what are the ideals of those around you? Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, taken a bit out of context here, I just really like the quote for this. The work she has done has been more in the realm of death and dying, and dealing with death and dying and those who are in that situation. And she says this, she said, people are like stained glass windows. They sparkle and shine when the sun is out. But when the darkness sets in, their true beauty is revealed only if there is a light from within. And I think our responsibility as humans is when we see somebody else's light, not so bright, are we able to tap into what lights them up, their core ideals, their passions? So if I know what they are and I see that people aren't as engaged, aren't as committed, can I tap into that inner light, what gets them out of bed, and to be of service to them in some way to reignite that? And the same for us as individuals. If we feel we're a little burned out or, not as engaged at work as I used to be, tap back into those core ideals and those passions about what gets you out of bed. How can I do more of that inside or outside of work? The last piece that I'd like to share a few thoughts on is this idea of innovating out. And the three behaviors, if you will, associated with innovating out are, I view challenges as opportunities. It's around being a problem solver, but it's looking at challenges and not seeing adversity, but seeing, oh, this is an opportunity. It's about being able to go up, down, and around or through something, improvising my way around or through obstacles. And it's around being curious. And a part of innovating out is having a sense of curiosity. It's about there's not one right way to do it. It's about seeking out thoughts from others. It's about seeking resources from others and from within ourselves. One of the Sufi tales, which I think ties directly to this, is a story of the father and the son. And something bad would happen to one of them, and the town would say, "Oh, how horrible that happened." And the dad would say, "Is it a good thing or a bad thing? Who knows?" Because whatever it is, if the town people saw it was a bad thing, it might cause something good to happen. And the tale goes on and on, that something bad would happen to the son or to him. And because of whatever that bad thing was, something good would come next. So the Sufi tale really, to me, why I believe it's around resilience, is when I'm in a situation that maybe I think is challenged, like or adverse, thinking, is there any possible way in which this could actually turn out to be good? Can I kind of remove that cloud that this guy's wearing on the screen? Is there any possible way in which this could turn out to be good? And what can I do to make this happen? So it's thinking, kind of taking yourselves out of it. Okay, how could this be good? And what can I do to make this happen? That perspective of being open to change. I think Louis Pasteur said it best. Louis Pasteur said, chance favors only the prepared mind. And this came from the fact that, a lot of people would say, oh, that scientific discovery was luck, right? Or that Post-it note was developed because of luck. They were looking to make a glue that didn't work. It was luck. The slinky on our cover slide, luck that was developed. And what he says is the mind saw that there were other possibilities here. Oh, the glue didn't work. Instead of saying I'm a failure, I made a mistake, it's I wonder how else I could use this. How could this possibly turn out to be good? The slinky, the story behind the slinky is that the gentleman was working on some sailing apparatus and needed something to keep it stable in the boat, and was working with springs. And as his wife walked into the room, one of the springs walked off the table, and they both kind of laughed and were like, well, I guess that's not going to work. And then chance favors only the prepared mind. She said, well, how cool would that be if it was a kid's toy that walked down the stairs? So the slinky was born out of sort of the mistake. But if I'm not open to see it, I start to think failure. Oh, that didn't work. How can I say any possible way this could be a good thing? Can't talk about resilience without talking about Mick Jagger. This story comes out of a wonderful book called The Beautiful Constraint. And in it, they talk about how the moves like Jagger were born. Legend has it that when the Rolling Stones started performing, they were first performing in very small venues, and their equipment took up a big part of the stage. So he only had a little bit of room to perform and had to make a choice. I can either just kind of stay still, or I'm going to have to turn this into a good thing. How do I perform in this tiny little space that is entertaining, that will be different than what anyone else is doing? So the moves like Jagger were built from innovating out from a constraint. So when you think about, I think we hear this inside organizations a lot. Well, we can't do that because, or I can't do that because it's never been done before, blah, blah, blah. That's not innovating out. Innovating out is changing that language. I can do this if, or we can do this if, or I can do this when, or we can do this when. So my challenge for you is to think about, in what situations maybe do you rely on I can't because, or we can as a team because? Are there different people or different kinds of teams that you work with, or different things that happen that cause you to start this? Oh, we can't do that because.
and what needs to happen for you to change the language, for you to innovate out, for you to change it to, well, we can if, or I can if, or I can when. Innovating out starts with us challenging ourselves to look at things differently. So again, a few thoughts on those 4 pieces of the motto of the leader's mind: accept reality, search for meaning, innovate out. Um, Tons of work done on why resilience is important. I do love this. This is more than education, more than experience, more than training. A person's level of resilience will determine who succeeds and who fails. It's true in the cancer ward, it's true in the Olympics, and it's true in the boardroom. So my invitation to you is to think about, okay, what might I need to do differently to build my resilience? What will I commit to doing today in order to build the foundation I have around resilience? What will I do to expand that? And then I think from an altruistic perspective, how can you help others around you build their own resilience? And the third is, do you need help in either of those 2? And how will you get that help? My hope is that you found today helpful. Thank you so much for joining us. Please follow us on any of these social media. Please reach out if we can be helpful. Have a great day, everyone.